Hi everybody, I'm Scott, and in this video I want to compare the Blackmagic Micro Studio Camera 4K G2 to the, well, G1. I've actually got two of them here, and the reason for that is I want to replace my current two overhead G1 cameras with these new ones. So I'll go to the selfie shaky cam view for a second. The camera that you're watching me through right now is a Micro Studio Camera 4K G1, and it is the sibling of the ones on my ceiling. Well, they're not actually on the ceiling. They're attached to this crossbar, but you get the idea. And so there's one, and there's the other. They're both on magic arms, so that I can easily adjust them for whatever shot I'm trying to get. And the way I usually use them is this one's for a wide view, and this one's for obviously a zoomed in view. And so that comes into play, if you've seen any of my other videos, when I'm looking at, for example, a piece of equipment like this server, take off the lid, we could see a wide shot of it, and then I can easily just go in for a close-up on the circuit board, for example. But here is one thing I never liked about the G1 cameras. And you can see all this labeling here is kind of dark, but my hand is reasonably well exposed. So what I always end up doing is pushing up the gain. Now the circuit board's a lot more visible. You could easily see what's in there, but my hand is overexposed. Now, of course, there are other things I could do about that. For example, I could just give us a little more lift and maybe just a tad more gain, and then mess with the gamma a little bit. And I can go back and forth and try to get it fairly visible while still keeping my hand from blowing out completely. But you can see it's still overexposed. That still doesn't look good. And it's not really terribly important. I mean, let me back up for a second. I don't consider myself to be like a YouTuber. I feel like that's a loaded term anyway. But what I am is a gearhead. I have a studio here that's way more complicated than I need for my videos. I mean, all these cameras and everything are connected to an ATEM2ME production switcher 4K, which I got on eBay. I didn't buy it new. It was ridiculously expensive at the time. But I don't need that. You know, I could easily shoot these kind of videos with a cell phone, but I like the gear. I like the setup. I like the wiring. I like all that kind of stuff. So that's where I'm coming from on this, in case you're wondering why I have an excess of cameras. And just to make it clear what I'm on about, so I got the little desk camera that you saw already. I've got, of course, this camera right here. I've got a camera behind me and to the right that I usually point at the desk, but now it's pointing towards the ceiling, so you can see what's up there. I've got these two cameras above, which we're talking about now. I also have another camera for close-ups from the front. So the upshot is that these G2 cameras have a different sensor in them, and the sensor is really the purpose of the upgrade. Otherwise, not too much different. These have a USB port. It gets rid of the dongle with the DB15 connector in favor of just straight HDMI and a barrel plug for DC. And I'll show you all the connections right now, because that's what we're here for. I already took the plastic wrap off of this one, but yeah, with Blackmagic, the unboxing is never terribly dramatic, which I appreciate. I mean, I don't need fancy packaging for this. So it comes with the actual camera head. And if you're familiar with other Blackmagic prosumerish type products like this, bunch of different power connectors for the included power adapter, which has a nice screw. I say nice, the cable's not really that nice. It's kind of just rough and ready, but nice screw-on DC barrel plug, which of course matches up to this 12-volt input right here. USB-C, HDMI. On the other side, mini DIN SDI in and outs, and a mic in. And just to show you how that differs, well, let me take this off of the tripod so we can take a better look at it. And just so you can see, what I have here is a right angle. It's actually a VGA connector to bring that DB15 connection up and over the camera. Got it zip tied there, and it goes into a DB15 extension. And that's really just to get the power into it. I could have just made a DB15 connector with just the 12-volt input, but I didn't do that. I was a little lazy, and I happen to have a lot of VGA connectors hanging around. I didn't realize the connectors on Gen 1 were gold-plated. They are no longer gold-plated. Oh, and most Blackmagic products come with stickers. And in case you're wondering, this is the pancake lens I had on that camera. It actually has a UV filter on it. I assume it's UV, not clear. Yeah, UV. And that's just because it's on the desk and I move it around, so just in case anything hits the front of it, doesn't damage the lens. It's a fixed 20mm lens, which is fairly tight, but I'm using it for close-ups, although it's not a macro lens. And there's the two of them. From the front, you can't even really tell which is the Gen 1 and which is the Gen 2. And from the bottom, they're very similar, although the Gen 1 has a USB connector on the bottom rather than on the side, which, you know, I guess is more convenient. And that was actually a micro USB. Very outdated, but you can see the mounting holes the same. And on the top, they're virtually identical, although this one does have a record button. And same at the back. They both take a Canon LP-E6N battery. I think just any Canon LP-E6. I don't think the N is relevant. And it does work just fine with aftermarket batteries like this Wasabi Power One. Where the differences really lie are on the inputs and outputs. So you can see we still have the SDI in and out. Oh. Well, shit. Well, I boofed a little bit. I didn't realize these were micro BNCs. I thought these were the same kind of micro DIN connectors as on the old cameras, but they're not. So they changed the connectors. I need to get some adapters for those. But anyway, as you can see, both still have a mic input, but only the G1 has headphone out, which I believe can be used for talkback. And on this side, it's really different. Obviously, HDMIs are the same, but this is just called an expansion port. This has the DC input, tally, a bunch of other things. And if you're familiar with the G1, you'll know. And as mentioned before, this has a DC barrel jack, as well as a USB-C connector with a retention screw hole. And then other than record, the buttons on the side are the same. Menu navigation up, down, which I think can also control the aperture, set, and power. And the USB-C port is a main differentiating factor. I think it can be used to update firmware, which is what the port on the bottom of the G1 camera is for. But more importantly, this can be used for recording to flash media or SSDs, providing it's fast enough. And that's where the record button comes in, because you can use this as a mostly independent camera with just a USB-C drive attached to it. And of course, you'd probably want some kind of monitor as well. The hell they got under my fingernail? And while that's definitely useful, I'm not going to be using it in that way. And let's face it, I mean, you really probably would want to attach a monitor to this if you're recording to media and trying to use this as an independent camera. And if you're attaching a monitor to it, well, why not a monitor with a record function, which you could do with this one anyway. So I don't know. It's very cool, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to find uses for it, but for me, it's not that useful, and there are ways to do the same thing with this camera. They're both micro 4/3 mounts. Let me bump up the gain a little so we can maybe see into there a little bit better. But yeah, that's those are the sensors. The main reason for my upgrade is that, as I intimated earlier, this camera has very poor dynamic range, the G1. And that's down to the sensor. This one is supposed to have a much better sensor with wider dynamic range, a higher base ISO, and presumably less noise as well at higher gains. And I know I'm mixing up ISO and gain, but you know what I mean. But I'm not really going to be able to do shit without a mini BNC connector. So I guess I'm going to cut for now, and I'll have to order that. It is the next day. I've had a haircut and shaved, as you can see. And in the meantime, Amazon has saved the day. Well, kind of. So yeah, that was a bit dumb. These are micro BNC connectors, not DIN connectors. And I didn't have any micro BNC cables, so I got two from sort of no-name brands. They were the only ones that would deliver next day. Actually, it was same day, because by the time I ordered them, it was well after midnight. But anyway, and I didn't actually want to get two different cables. I wanted to get, well, I actually wanted to get 4 cables, but they only had one of each available same day. But as you can see,
micro,
BNC connectors, as opposed to these
mini,
DIN connectors with a retractable sleeve. What do you call that? That unlocks it. So these just are push on and then they're locked in. You pull that off. I don't mind these connectors. This was the only device I had that used these connectors. So now all of these cables are useless to me, which is kind of bad because these are, I think I got these from B&H. I don't remember what brand they are, but they were relatively expensive. These cables, although they're no-name brands, are also very expensive. These were like 30 bucks a piece. And they work just like regular BNC connectors. Twist on, twist off, and you kind of push as you twist. You know how BNC connectors work. And on the other end of both of these are female BNC connectors, so that I can add some cable length to them, because these are going to be uselessly short for my application. So yeah, that's one thing. I'm not too happy that they changed the connectors. I mean, like I said, I have no micro BNC stuff, so I have no micro BNC cables until today. And that's kind of annoying, though, if you had these set up in a studio. Like, you would have to either rewire or use an adapter. And I looked briefly. I couldn't find this style of DIN connector to micro BNC. So you could always cut the heads off of them and put on your own micro BNC terminations. But yeah, not ideal. I also went to B&H to try to get some long cables. I need about 5-meter cables to run up over the gantry and then down this pole over here to my switcher. I mean, 4-meter would probably do the trick, but I like to get my cables a little long if possible. And B&H was completely out of those cables. So it said temporarily out of stock, but who knows what that means. So kind of unfortunate. I got more of these short ones on their way. I'll just extend them with normal BNC cables. I just don't like having extraneous junctions on my cable runs, especially for high frequency, high data rates like these. I'm not going to get into all the specs. You can look those up, but one of the other major differences here is that the G2 camera is 12G SDI and can do 4K 60 FPS, or, you know, and other things that 12G SDI will handle. It has enough bandwidth for that, whereas the old camera was 6G SDI, which I think maxed out at 4K 30 FPS. For me, it doesn't matter. I shoot this and everything else down here at 24 frames per second just because I like the look better, and I don't really need the high frame rate for what we're doing here. So saves me some storage space. Let me stop waffling and do what we all came here for, which is to get the new camera powered up, and then I'll do some comparison shots between the old and the new and see if the G2 cameras are really an improvement as far as image quality goes down to the sensor, if you're not concerned with the technical improvements of the standard standards upgrade to 12G SDI and everything that entails. I also shoot down here at 24 FPS because then I can do a 180 degree shutter angle and get more light per frame than if I was shooting at 60 FPS and doing a 180 degree equivalent shutter angle. Comes down to personal preference as far as the look goes. So yeah. Nope, I could feel the fan turned on. The G1 cameras also had an internal fan to cool the sensor, and presumably processor in here. FPGA, not really sure. And white LED on top. Of course, no display, so we'll have to hook something up to the HDMI output. And for that, let's connect it to the switcher. And this is the display from the camera, just hooking up the HDMI. Ooh, a lens would be nice. That's the raw sensor. It looks like it's nice and even. Nice even white light. No dead pixels, no muted areas, which might be indicative of sensor issue. Whoa, what's the gain set on this by default? Well, asked and answered at 0 dB. So, obviously the HDMI output has the informational display. You see frames per second, shutter angle, or shutter speed, iris, gain, white balance, and tint. Alright, well, just to be lazy, I just did a wipe across the screen between the camera's output so you can see what buttons I'm pressing in the corner here. Hopefully it won't obstruct the menus. So we're going to select English, set is at the bottom, and the codec's obviously going to be applicable when you're shooting to local USB storage. I'm going to hit set, and that should bring us into this menu. That's nice that it has all the usual codecs you'd find on Blackmagic's fancier cameras. Resolution, well yeah, I guess if you're recording RAW. Dynamic range, extended video. Now, does dynamic range just change for recording, or does that change? It's hard to tell right now. Well, we'll go with extended video. I'm not going to be grading this footage, so. And there you go. That's the options for record in case you were curious. And then moving up from record, we got monitor. So for HDMI, you can select a clean feed. Get rid of all the informational displays. You can also have Zebra, which is nice. Focus assist, which I really like, especially if you're using a small monitor. Frame guides, grid, all the stuff you'd usually expect. I mean, this you did not get on the G1 camera, which could not record independently. So I guess this camera is really more of a combination between the old Micro Cinema camera and the Micro Studio camera. And for the SDI output, it's either 2160 or 1080p. 1080i is grayed out, and I can't select it, not that I'd want to. Can't imagine many of you would want 1080i, but hey, teach their own. Audio. Oh, you can have audio meters, that's nice. Excellent. Yeah, I'm really liking the feature set on this. Like I said, I'm not going to be using it as a standalone camera, but I'll try connecting a drive to it later on just to see what that's like. If I know my Blackmagic devices, you can also change the name via a utility from Blackmagic Design using the USB-C connection. Like, can you type in here? No, it doesn't look like you can actually change it in here anyway. Image stabilization. What? I wasn't even aware it had that. I'm turning it off because this is going to be on a fixed mount, but this has an NTP client. Wait, how does that have an NTP client? Does it have a network connection? You can even set light theme or dark theme. Position the menu, yeah. I personally prefer shutter angle, but that's just me. And I can do internal timing because well, actually, I'm going to be feeding the switcher back into it so I can control the camera via the SDI input from the switcher. So, but internal or external doesn't really matter because the switcher will retime it. I'm guessing motion sensor recalibration is for the image stabilization, right? We have some LUTs. You can set presets, I like that. Slate. Again, if you're recording locally to the camera, that's great. Yeah, I mean, it's a good feature set. And by default, the up and down buttons control the iris. So we can finally tone that image down. I probably should have done that first. But this is at 0 dB gain. Sorry, it's upside down. But right away, I mean, usually I'm running these cameras wide open, which for the lenses I'm using is like f3.5 to f5.6 on the lenses up there. And obviously this lens that you're looking at right now goes to f1.8, but I don't shoot it that wide because the depth of field would be ridiculous. I don't need super shallow depth of field for this, nor do I want it in most cases. But yeah, I mean, wow. Like, it actually looks nicely exposed at f7.3-ish. And okay, I'm at a 144 degree shutter angle. And hitting set when you're on this screen allows you to navigate all these sections. So presumably I can easily change the shutter angle. Yep. And just go straight to 180 there. And menu to get out of that. Yeah, so I really like that. It's very intuitive to operate all these controls. Oh, and a histogram. It's very intuitive to operate everything you see on screen with just these few buttons. I very much like that. In fact, intuitive but not convenient. You know what I mean? Like, it's still a lot of button presses, but hey, such a tiny camera, that's great. Probably at about 5100K down here. Yeah, and also had some white balance presets I saw. I mean, immediately, this already looks much better than the G1 camera. Immediately. Like, honestly, I'd push up the saturation a little bit, which you can do, especially it's easy to do with the ATEM control panel, but, yeah, just the dynamic range, just from this one shot, already looks a ton better. Well, color me impressed. I really like this camera already. And I've only been using it for 2 seconds. The one thing that is sort of concerning me, I guess, is that it's getting real hot. Like, I was holding like this, and I had my finger resting. It's not, I wasn't covering the vent holes. They're just above the vent holes, and it's actually uncomfortable to hold. One moment. A little non-contact thermometer. Let's just see. 54 degrees centigrade. My battery's low. Then this should be the... Ow! Oh, I just touched something and that was actually too hot. Wow. And this is the input side, or intake side of the airflow, and it's at 35 degrees. It's not 35 degrees in here. The ambient temperature in here is probably about 25 degrees. And of course this thing's low on batteries. Great. I really do use the all-max batteries, by the way. If you've seen it in my previous videos. Wasn't making it up. Been using them for years. Well, okay, and to be fair, the Fujis as well, because those were also good value for money. Anywho, just want to check out the back of this thing. 43... Ow. Jesus, it's like really hot coming out of there. 57... Yeah. I mean, Blackmagic equipment tends to run very hot. Okay, this is outside the purview of the studio lights, but, so it's very bright over here, not so bright over here. Got the ATEM 2ME production studio switcher right there, and some other various Blackmagic equipment, and just the side of this rack is at 34 degrees, which is 10 degrees above ambient. And I haven't even had this equipment on very long. If I put my hand there, I can feel warmer air coming out of all this stuff than the metal is. I can't really get the non-contact thermometer in there. But anyway, suffice to say, and like I said, it's all overkill down here. All overkill. Most of that stuff is used from eBay, by the way. I'm not buying all this shit new. Alright, let's get a side-by-side test going. Okay, one very important thing I forgot, and this is only relevant if you're using this as a studio camera and not as a standalone camera, is I gotta set the camera ID number. ATEM camera ID, that's what we want. And I'm going to swap this out for camera 8. And the reason that needs to be set is because I'm going to be sending commands to this via SDI, via the SDI input here, which is going to come from one of the outputs on the switcher. And that's going to send commands to the camera, and those commands are going to address this camera by its camera number. And so for obvious reasons, you want the camera ID in the camera to match the input you have this on the switcher, so that when you have this camera on program or preview, you know which one you're messing with. I mean, in theory, you could mix them all up, but that would really be undesirable. So, yeah. And by the way, the camera shooting this, you can see, like, you can see I'm going to get really blown out over there. And it's actually very yellow. For some reason, this camera shoots very yellow. It is a full-size studio camera, but Gen 1. Apparently the Gen 2, the Pro ones, are much better. So this is camera 8 right here. Mini DIN connections. Can't even get a grip on that. Honestly, I'm going to be glad to be rid of these DB15 connectors. And of course, I just disconnected my close-up camera, but I guess we can resolve that. When the Gen 1 cameras came out, I actually thought this was a really cool feature because, of course, you don't have to have this whole octopus, dongle thing attached to it. You could buy your own DB15 connector and just connect up whatever pins you need for whatever features you need. But they kind of intended this to be used potentially on like gimbals, on drones. It has reference in, PTZ control, blank, power in. It was just annoying the power in was part of this. So like out of the box, you couldn't just neatly hook up. So I'm really glad they changed it to a standard barrel plug. And it's 12 volts. I'm not sure of the amperage. Can I just use the existing power supply that I have up there? So the new power supply is, well, we know it's 12 volts, and it's rated at 3 amps, which is 36 watts, obviously. The power supplies for the old, I just took a picture of it because I don't feel like getting a camera up there right now, but the old power supplies are 12 volts, 1.67 amps. So you cannot use one of the old power supplies with this new camera, and this probably does produce a lot more heat. So being in the same form factor, presumably this new camera is going to generate a lot more heat than the old one. And thermal dissipation wise, it's the same form factor. So you're basically dissipating twice as much energy through the same surface area. I mean, the heat sink design internally might be different. I'm sure they know what they're doing with thermal management, but yeah, man, that was running hot. Oh, by the way, I found this kind of funny. On both the cameras that are up in that gantry, whatever you want to call it, I have the exact same lens. One is in black, one's in silver. And they're both Olympus Mzucchio digital 14 to 42 millimeter, 3.5 to 5.6 on the aperture. And I just thought that was kind of amusing because that is the exact same lens they show on the front of the box. These are not the best lenses in the world as far as image quality goes. You're not going to be shooting a feature film with one of these. But the main reason this pairs well with one of these micro studio cameras is because, well, first of all, it's form factor. I mean, this is with the lens extended all the way, but it basically, when it's not zoomed in, it'll be flush with the surface of this focus ring. So it's a very compact lens. It's a very light lens. But most importantly, it has an electronic zoom ring, which usually I would not really like so much, but in this case, you can zoom it via the ATEM switcher. So if this is a remote camera head somewhere, I mean, for me, it's like it's right above me. It's within reach. But if this is a remote camera head mounted somewhere, up near the ceiling of a studio, you don't need any extra accoutrements to enable remote zooming and, of course, electronic focus adjustment. So you can remote focus and remote zoom it. That's the upshot of what I'm trying to say. The only thing that kind of sucks about it is at 14 millimeters, the widest aperture is 3.5, and at 42 millimeters, it goes down to f5.6. Especially with these cameras, you either need to push the gain up a lot or you need a lot of light. So I always run these at plus 6 dB gain and pretty much wide open, even if I'm not zoomed in all the way. But anyway, let's slap this lens on the new camera. And I'm going to position it roughly there because I'll bring this other camera next to it so we can, this has a much shorter magic arm. And I'll adjust these so they have roughly the same field of view, and we can look at the same thing with the Gen 1 camera and the Gen 2 camera once I hook it up. And this BMMSC cable is very high quality, very expensive, but very thick, yet supple. It's made by Canary, I don't know how to pronounce it honestly, from Japan. Whereas this cable is thin and very stiff and shitty. Like I said, no name brand off Amazon. And this cabling is all just temporary. I'm not trying to be neat about this. Just trying to get the camera up and running. Alright, so let's go behind the scenes. This is my ATEM software control. Obviously, that's what it says at the top. I guess that was unnecessary for me to say. I usually switch cameras with this X keys box that just has camera 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever. And so this is Blackmagic G1, Blackmagic G2. Micro Studio Camera, I mean. Now G1 looks better right now. It's contrastier. It's got the saturation pushed up. But of course, we should be able to make this look like that. And I'm going to composite all this in editing, but we can see that we can zoom in and out cam 7 and cam 8 with those lenses. And also control the iris, aperture, whatever you want to call it, and bump up or bring down the gain. And you can expand this to get more control over things like saturation, contrast. Ooh, that's a little much. I'm trying to match these in the tiny preview monitors. I'm not really trying to go overboard right now matching them. And I'm actually, like I said, it's probably more like 5100K. I think I measured it recently. I'll have to get my light meter out again. But I like it. I like my image to appear a little warmer, so I usually set the color temperature higher than it actually is by a little bit, at least in the studio down here. So that's Micro Studio Camera Gen 1 and Gen 2, which is a little oversaturated right now, I think. Yeah, I mean, those colors are probably somewhat true to life. It's a little redder, a little pinker on the skin tones there. Okay, I'm just boosting the saturation all the way just to get an idea of whether... I mean, this table color I find is really helpful for matching cameras because it's brown and variegated, and it's... so I know if I punch the saturation up all the way, that should be the color of the table approximately. So we bring the saturation down to a more natural level. I'm sort of just trying to match it to the other camera. That's not too bad. And now the G1 camera just looks so... like, it has such a matte quality to it. And like, I can boost the gain up, but now you can see it's blowing out the highlights. Like over here by my fingers. Like, those are... that's absolutely blown out. Like, lighting on my hand just looks terrible. Like, yeah, that's way too harsh of that gain. So I usually don't bring it up to 12 dB unless I'm like looking inside a computer or something and I really need to get some extra gain. But let's just boost it a little bit. I mean, I have a waveform monitor. I don't know why I'm eyeballing this shit, but that's pretty close. Okay, so I did something a little crazy. I don't know if this is a good demonstration or not, but I printed out some text at about a 12-point font on black paper. Looks like our shadows are maybe a little red there. Again, I mean, I'll have to play with it. Maybe look for some lookup tables. If you can even use the LUTs for SDI output and not just record. I think these sensors are slightly different sizes, so I'm not getting the same field of view out of both lenses at the same zoom. So I'm trying to zoom them to roughly the same field of view. Obviously, right off the bat here, I mean, that looks way more contrasty. I don't want to punch up the contrast too much. It's starting to look unnatural a little bit. I mean, look, I'm not going to match these two cameras right now, just offhand. But, I mean, it's not horrible. But now, just as sort of an experiment, let's see what we need to do to make that text legible. If I push the gain up, obviously that's going to do the trick. Bringing the contrast down a touch. I mean, that's kind of legible, but obviously you can tell the exposure is just horrible now. And then camera 8, let's push up the gain. I mean, pushing up the gain right away makes it somewhat legible. So yeah, the text is roughly legible. Obviously the color is not matched very well, but G2, G1. Yeah, you definitely have a lot more latitude here. What if I punch the G2 up to 12 decibels gain? Yeah, I mean, obviously that's blowing out the highlights, but it's not blowing them out in the same unpleasant way that's characteristic of the Gen 1 camera. Like, this is what I'm used to if I'm trying to see something really dark or with really low contrast. Something that's perhaps more in my milieu is this. And you can see how pushing the gain up really makes the circuit board more visible and the details of it much more visible. Obviously, you can pump more light on it too. But if you pump more light on it by the same token, I'd still have my hand overexposed. Well, the circuit board is maybe a little overexposed right now, but just by comparison, if we take the gain back down to 6 decibels, I mean, you still have good visibility. My hand's okay as far as exposure goes. But if it's a much deeper computer case and the thing I'm working on is farther in there, it's not getting as much light because I have a lot of oblique lights. Because if I try to use a direct ring light above this, you're going to see a ton of glare. So I have to use oblique lighting. The problem with oblique lighting is, of course, that if this is a deeper computer case with higher sides, it's basically like flagging off a large portion of your light. And so then obviously bumping up the gain helps, but that looks horrible. Now this, by the way, this is 12 dB gain on the Gen 2, and I'm going to take this down to 6 dB gain. So there, that's kind of the effect. Like now they're probably going to be more evenly matched. Yeah, still not perfect, but much more evenly matched. And like I said, with the Gen 1, looks like that. The Gen 2 looks like that. And according to my waveform monitor, my hand's not actually blown out right now. So in post, I could recover some of this contrast. Again, these are just my first impressions, and just so you know what we're working with here as far as lighting goes. Wow, that is a reflective display and very dim. So this is what I'm talking about. I can't always just adjust the lighting down here because sometimes we have to see a screen like this, which is definitely legible here, but it's dim. And so usually I just end up pumping up the gain. Makes it much more legible, even at the cost of what's around it. But let's just boost the gain a little more subtly. Well, maybe not that subtle. So yeah, okay, more like 5200K or 5.2 KK, and that's about 2950 lux. And you can see we're very, very heavily weighted on blue. That's because almost all these lights in here are LEDs. Although you'd be forgiven for calling rubbish on me because there is a blue LED light bulb right there and a red one on the other side actually. But let me just turn that off and then take another reading. And that was throwing off our overall color temperature measurement by about 200K. But you can see there's still a huge blue spike there, and that just comes from the blue LEDs with the white phosphor or yellow phosphor in most of these LED fixtures. And so that blue light and a red light here, both just out of shot most of the time and sort of pointing at the desk. It's so bright in here, those don't really make a difference as far as overall lighting goes. And obviously it kind of matches the background, the red and blue, and sort of blending into purple. The reason I have those two lights, I don't think anyone's ever noticed or commented or cared about this. You can see the blue light just gleaming off that. But by and large, you don't see that blue tint on anything unless it catches that reflection. And since those lights are very oblique, with this laying flat on the table, you don't even notice that blue light at all. But if I'm moving it around, yeah, you can see that blue wash come across the circuit board. And I know it's kind of lame. I just feel like it adds a little bit of panache to these videos. And then if I turn it this way, you can see a red light wash across it. And you usually won't have a situation where you see both the red and blue lights at the same time. But this way, if I'm moving, as I'm moving this thing around, it just adds, I think, a little bit of visual interest. Like, oh, now it's a little blue, a little red, without actually distracting from what I'm trying to show you. I don't know why I felt like pointing that out, but that's what I got going on down here. Like I said, everything's just a little extra because, you know, I'm more into the gear and the setup than this actual talking thing that I'm doing right now. I'm not very good at it, if you haven't noticed. Oof, this app does not support display scaling. Alright, well that DXM app is basically useless, but what I've done here is killed most of the studio lights. Now, of course, the red and blue light is much more visible because that's a much higher proportion of the light that's hitting everything here. I think the light's just showing warmer because of the red LED lamp right there, but I haven't changed the camera settings at all. So this is the lighting that we have right now. And as you can see, 564 lux. That's probably going to be a little off just because of all the weird colored lights that's hitting this. Here's what we're going to do. We're on cam 7 right now, which is the Blackmagic Gen 1. Let's just see what the Gen 2 looks like without any... Oh, I'm zoomed out all the way. Actually, you know what? Let's go with a wider field of view on both of these. Just to give a better idea of what's going on around here. Yeah, that's roughly the same. So I haven't changed any camera settings. Although it would be nice if we were at least somewhat focused. And I'm putting a lot of shadow on it because there are still lights behind me. There are just no lights in front of me. And I feel like that's good because I can block off a lot more light easily if I need to. So without me moving, that's cam 8. That's the Gen 2. And that's the Gen 1. I mean, the Gen 2 immediately looks more pleasing. maybe a little too far into the red, but I didn't adjust the white balance on these anyway, so. But now what I really want to do is, this is the Gen 2. It's at 0 dB gain right now. I'm going to pump it up to 6 dB gain. And now we're on Cam 7, which is Gen 1. It's already at 6 dB gain. So I'm going to pump it up to 12, which is the max. Oh no, 18 is the max. Yeah, let's punch up the Gen 2 to 12 dB of gain. Just to get these looking roughly the same. And again, the Gen 1 is at 6 dB higher than the Gen 2. And you can see quite a lot of noise in there. Let me get the black card in here. I'll zoom in on it in post. Yeah, so you can see, very noisy. This, to my eye, looks a lot better. I mean, a lot better. But of course, this is only at 12 dB, whereas the other camera's at 18 dB. Let's punch the Gen 2 up to 18 dB. So these are both at 18 dB gain. Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 1, Gen 2, both at 18 dB gain. But again, to roughly match their exposure, the Gen 2 really should be at 12 dB gain and the Gen 1 at 18. And there you can see a whole hell of a lot of difference as far as noise goes. And then if I come in and shadow more of it, now you can really see the red and blue lights, which are 25 watt incandescent equivalents, I believe. And I'll just go again. Gen 1, Gen 2, 1, 2. Apologies if I didn't nail the focus before. Really looking more light than, image quality. But so according to that, we're at 5400K. But I bet if I aim it that way, mostly that blue light's going to be hitting it. Oh, over. Yeah, there it's saying 7,000. If you point it more at the red light, which you can see reflecting in the screen right now, it's not quite as warm as I would have expected it to read. All that red light pouring into it, but anyway, you see we still get that huge blue spike. Yeah, I mean, even just looking at this screen, like if I try to get the reflections off of it, Gen 1, Gen 2. I mean, the Gen 2 this sensor is just much better. I mean, without a doubt, it's a much better sensor. It's got better dynamic range. And as far as like color reproduction goes and color matching, that's the unfortunate thing. Just to give you an idea of how little light there is, this is the URSA Mini 4.6K shooting me right now. Haven't changed any settings on it, and obviously incredibly dark in here, relatively speaking. But yeah, like the URSA Mini is very hard to match with the Micro Studio cameras. But usually that's okay because I only use the URSA Mini for a one shot of myself, and occasionally like I'll hold something up to the camera and then present it down here, and there the match isn't as important because it's in a completely different environment and completely different scene, so the eye isn't going to notice as much. If I'm trying to use a Gen 1 camera with a Gen 2 camera for the same shot, they'd probably be hard to match. So if you're thinking about upgrading in your studio, I would recommend upgrading all your cameras, not just like one or two hero cameras, because you might have a bit of a pain in the ass time matching them. And also the problem with trying to match these two cameras is you're going to have to bring them down to the lowest common denominator, which is the Gen 1. So you're really just going to have to cripple the Gen 2's image quality to make it look like a Gen 1 camera. Which is why I got two of them for both my overhead cams, but I did not get one to replace my little desk cam, because that I don't use very often, and when I do, it's for extreme close-ups and completely different scene, completely different field of view, completely different arrangement than the overhead cameras. The one thing that I would like to swap out is this camera. It's a full-size studio camera. Let me get the lights back on down here. Man, it's so much easier with DMX. Also unnecessary, but oh yeah. And so this camera is this camera. So it's sort of like my over-the-shoulder shot usually. And this is a Gen 1 studio camera, full size obviously. But I think it has the same sensor as the Micro Studio camera. And this one always shoots yellow. I always have to like color correct it slightly, which again can be done in the ATEM software control. So if you go to Cam 6, I don't know, it always reads a little yellow. I don't want to spend too much time adjusting everything, so I'll usually just pull it towards the blue a little bit. But again, you can see if I punch up the gain, like we got an overexposed area here. If I'm trying to show you something over here, and this is partially the fault of my lighting, it's a little maybe underexposed. As soon as my hand hits the main lighting, it just gets overexposed right there. So yeah, I mean, yeah, that actually is probably a good shot to look at. There's a bunch of my crap. You can see all my crap back there. That's the Gen 2. Oh, so the Gen 1 camera is still at 18 dB. That's why it looks so bright. So again, just because this is kind of a contrasty dark area of the basement, I'm gonna bring the Gen 2 camera up to that's 6 dB right there. And that looks fine. That looks realistic as to what the lighting is back there to my eye. And again, this is the Gen 1 camera at 18 dB gain. Let's see if I bring it down to 12. I'm going to try to get a similar field of view by zooming in. Okay, I mean, a wacky angle difference, but so again, Gen 2, Gen 1. 6 dB gain, 12 dB gain. And we really kind of get to see the same sort of stuff. We got to punch that up to 18 dB, but it gets really noisy there. And if I bring my hand into the shot, you can see how overexposed that is. Whereas if I leave my hand in the same plane, we switch over. Oh, there's the Gen 2 camera. Gen 1 camera. So my hand has the same amount of light on it in either camera, even though field of view is different. But the lighting's not changing. And you can see, even though it's out of focus, you're getting a lot more detail and you're not getting all those highlights blown out. All right, well, that was a little haphazard, but I hope that gives you at least an idea of the difference in the look between the two cameras. Not a comprehensive test, but there are a couple more things I want to try. I want to try recording to an attached USB drive. It also talks about DHCP and NTP servers. So I want to see, can I attach a network adapter to that USB-C port and connect it to the network? But these are the things I want to answer. I'm going to get a couple of more cables with micro BNC connectors and wire this up properly. And ultimately, I'm going to mount both of these cameras above me on that gantry. So one thing I wanted to check, and I probably should have done this first, is whether there's new firmware available for these cameras. And I should have showed you the latest firmware, which I didn't. But if there's any major changes, I'll let you know. If not, then not. But I will show you the update procedure real quick so that you know what's involved. If you've used Blackmagic stuff before, it's going to be pretty similar. You load up the Blackmagic software utility, you connect the camera via USB, and away it goes. Usually auto detects it, recommends updating, and then updates. I haven't had anything, I mean, knock on wood, I haven't had anything brick during an update from Blackmagic, so their updates have been pretty reliable overall. Downloading the firmware was easy. You download it from Blackmagic's site, it's under support. Just scroll down, you'll see all the product categories. And so we're going to install cameras 9.1.1, which has a date of October 14th, which is more recent than when I bought the camera. So yeah, it's probably going to be new firmware for us. And you'll notice it says Blackmagic Camera Utility. It's because in most cases you can actually use this utility to configure the camera or the device, because almost all Blackmagic devices have this kind of software. And so it'll do firmware updates, but also allow you to change things like IP addresses, device names, and I covered that earlier when we first looked at it. And yeah, I can change the device name on this, which is probably a good idea. And there we go. And then you should find that in the Start menu under Blackmagic Design. You can see I've already set up other things with this computer before, but Blackmagic Camera Setup, new, right there. Allow access. It doesn't need access to the public internet. And of course, no camera accessory found. Camera's plugged into power already, and so all I'm going to do is plug it into USB. I have a USB hub right here which is connected to this computer, so we'll plug it in via that USB A to C cable, and then plug the end of the C cable into there, and right away it detects it, and in theory it should recommend a software update if one's available, or firmware update. I guess not. Software is version 8.4, and you can always check the version of the software here. It's 9.1.1, but I'm not sure if that's supposed to match the firmware version. But as long as we're in here, this is eventually going to be Cam 7. And I'm going to connect the USB network adapter to this camera just to see if it can get an IP address off of that. It should be able to. And those are the settings that you have available here. And like I said, it didn't do it in this case, but if there was a firmware update available, it would tell you as soon as you plug in the camera, or at the very least tell you when you clicked on this and it connects to the camera. And before we move on, I just wanted to point out, I keep a repository of all the Blackmagic software I've ever downloaded. I'm actually kind of curious how far back this goes. Since 2016. And the reason for that is, if let's say now, today in 2024, I were to buy an older product that Blackmagic no longer supports from eBay, and it had a really old firmware version, I might not be able to get the latest firmware version from Blackmagic's site. They might stop supporting that device. So that could cause a problem. This way, at least I know I have older versions that will support their older products. So I think that's a good idea to keep these files. But anyway, that's what I do. I never like to rely on a vendor for my future use, especially when it comes to purchasing stuff on eBay. All right, so let's get this out of the way and bring this in. This is a USB Ethernet adapter. It also has a power input. One other thing I'm kind of curious about, I didn't read this as an officially supported feature, but can you power the camera off USB? So you can see there's a little power LED there next to the barrel plug. I'm going to disconnect the barrel plug. Obviously, camera shuts off. I'm going to bring in this high amperage USB-C power supply. It's capable of 250 watts total. Just got this recently, mostly for running laptops and stuff on the bench here. If the camera can be powered off USB, this will do the trick. This is a 240 watt capable cable. Should be more than enough for this camera. If this can't power it, I doubt anything can. No power LED, and I do have the camera currently hooked up via HDMI, but as we can see, we got nothing. Alright, so you can't power it via USB. I mean, you can, because you can get USB-C to barrel plug cables that have power delivery chips in them to negotiate, in this case, 12 volts. So as long as you get a 12 volt USB-C to barrel plug cable, and you have a USB power supply that can provide enough amperage to run the camera, you can definitely run this camera off of a USB-C power supply or a power bank. Again, if the power bank has the right specs. Anyway, let's get back to the subject of Ethernet. And I don't know if this camera will support the chipset that's in this adapter, but let's see. We have an Ethernet cable that's connected to a switch on the other end. See if we get link lights. We are getting link lights. A little hard to see. There you go. Link and activity. And so what is that showing on the camera itself? I don't have a lens on this right now, so we're not seeing anything. The cap is still on it. But let's go to the menu. That's weird. I set the name up here. The name should be Cam 7 right now. Oh yeah, that time is correct to the minute. And the time zone is correct as well. So I feel like it must have got that off of the network. Yeah, it got an IP address. That is awesome that this random Ethernet adapter works with this. So this is nothing fancy. I got this off Amazon. I'm pretty sure it was cheap. It's just a made in China, fairly generic one. It's branded Cables to Go. I've had some other Cables to Go cables and other products, and they seem to work all right. I'm not endorsing them. This isn't sponsored or anything. But at least I can tell you this one will work. Actually, let's put a lens on this. The other thing I want to try in this section of the video is USB-C storage. This is a Samsung USB-C SSD. 4 terabytes, very fast. It's a T7 model. Should be good enough for RAW, as well as USB-C cable. I also want to try this. I have this Transcend USB-C flash drive. I don't think it's going to be super fast. It is 512 gig, so you get a decent amount of record time off of it. I'm curious to see if this will work with the camera. Probably not at higher bit rates because this was a cheap drive. In fact, it was extra cheap because it was in pink. I think they had an overstock of pink. I don't care what it looks like, as long as it works. What I am curious about, though, is you'll notice this Ethernet adapter has a USB-C port there. That's so that if you have, let's say, a device with one USB-C port, but you want to power it, you can inject power through that port and also use the Ethernet port. Now, obviously, we know we can't power this camera off of USB-C, but can we get Ethernet and flash storage simultaneously using this? So, like, if we plug this into here and the Ethernet cable into here, we'll be able to record to this while also having Ethernet access. And bada bing, bada boom, we just got to stop this down quite a bit because it's at f1.8. In fact, I'm going to make the image extra dark on purpose just so you can more easily see the menu. It's kind of like I wish this could record in AVC or HEVC, but let's try 8:1. That is 12:1 is going to be the lowest quality, but let's try that level of compression. And let's put dynamic range at film. If media drops frames, stop recording, so we'll know if this little flash drive can't keep up with the recording. These will just stop. Okay, well that kind of answers that question right off the bat, so no drive. So let me pull this out and just connect. Will this fit? It won't fit with the HDMI. So just to be clear, if I pull the HDMI, a flash drive this size will fit comfortably in there next to the power connector. It's just the HDMI port. Maybe with a less chunky HDMI connector, you could get it in there because it's just like a couple of millimeters shy. So here I just have an extension cable. It's a USB-C, female on that end, male on that end, and I keep a few of these cables around specifically for cases like this where USB-C port is hard to get to. So now we have that connected. Okay, and in storage we see USB transcend. That is correct. Yeah, let's try recording something. And you can see it even says transcend at the bottom. Okay, histogram's got everything sort of right in the middle. Even that light isn't overexposed. I mean, this has good dynamic range because you can see the camera behind the lights. And based on the histogram, we're not really, yeah, we should be able to recover a lot of detail out of this. So I'm actually going to point it here because obviously these softboxes are going to overexpose most cameras. And behind it, it's actually, the lights are off and it's fairly dark to my eye back there. So yeah, let me hit the record button. And we are recording. It's set to stop recording if it drops frames. All right, so I mean, it's recording raw. We got 30 seconds. And I'm going to stop it. And just out of curiosity, I know, I mean, I'm curious. I know someone else is going to be curious. This isn't a, like, this is a decent USB-C stick, flash drive, whatever you want to call it. But it's not like super fast. Let's try 5:1. Why did the screen flicker for that? That was weird. Or was that just the HDMI out? All right, so we got 26 seconds of that. Let's try this codec. Oh yeah, it does seem to blink. I guess maybe it's resetting its FPGA or something when it's doing that. Okay, well, let's record. See if we can get another 30 seconds or so. Sorry for the shaky cam. This is not ergonomic right now. I'm in the middle of the edit, and this is bugging me. I don't know why the bitrate on the 3:1 compression ratio should be the same as the 5:1 compression ratio. It doesn't make any sense. And actually 3:1 was less. So I just wanted to do another test. And in the interim, I got this SanDisk 4 terabyte flash drive. Now this is actually, coincidentally, I didn't know this when I bought it, pictured on Blackmagic's site in relation to this camera. So as if they're kind of endorsing this device. Could be I got a faulty one, but the weird thing is, I was just trying to record some 3:1 compressed footage to this, which is freshly formatted, and it was dropping frames. Let me show you. Okay, so Blackmagic RAW 3:1 Ultra HD film, and it should be set to 24. Yeah, 24 FPS. So all the same settings as before when it's recording properly to that tiny little USB drive. So now I'm going to hit record. Yeah, before it was only going, it was going about 11 seconds. Now it went 8 seconds and 22 frames. And that is it stopped recording because it dropped a frame. I suppose it could be this USB-C cable. Let's use this super high quality one, which I was using before with the USB hub and the other flash drive. So maybe it was just the cable was so poor quality it was getting data errors or something. Well, yeah, okay, I'm going to stop it manually. So, ooh, exactly 31 seconds, just so I can see the bit rate of that file. And now I'm going to change this to 5:1. Ooh, almost got 31 again on the dot, 1 frame short. Okay, so fair play. It was just this really thin, cheap USB-C cable. I don't know what this came from, where I got it. It's unmarked. So, yeah, just a lesson to you. Don't use cheap cables for this. One sad part is I did buy some relatively cheap cables with retention screws to use with this camera. And, yeah, I guess we'll see. This one's thicker, though, which hopefully bodes well. But you never know. You can't really tell by the thickness of the cable. Alright, so I'm assuming it wasn't this drive's fault after all. And now what I'm going to do is connect this drive to the other computer. Okay, and here's the USB drive. Yeah, this doesn't make any sense. The second to last recording was the one at 3:1 compression ratio, and the last recording was at 5:1. And you can see here, the file sizes are pretty much identical. And remember, this second one was only 1 frame shy of 31 seconds. This one was exactly 31 seconds. And it's constant bitrate, so it doesn't matter if the image contents was different, but the image contents was the same. So I don't know why these files are the same size. One of them should be significantly larger than the other. Okay, and just for sanity's sake, I'm going to connect this back up to the camera, and we'll change the camera to 8:1. And I'll record another 31 seconds. I went over by 8 frames, but in theory this file size should be a lot smaller, not larger, because of those extra 8 frames, you know what I mean? And yeah, this is the file I just recorded, and as you can see, the file size is significantly smaller, despite it being 8 frames longer than this one, and 9 frames longer than this one. So yeah, this should be significantly smaller, because it's 8:1 compression ratio instead of 5:1, but 3:1 should be an yet larger file size. That's weird. Let me go back to my other machine and look at these in DaVinci Resolve and check the metadata to see if it shows that it was recording in 3:1 and 5:1. And just so it's clear, while I'm in there, I renamed the files to show this is 3:1, 5:1, and 8:1 compression, supposedly. Okay, so I imported the clips into DaVinci. You can see here, I'm sorry for the poor quality. I have this display at 3840 by 2160 and 100% display scaling, and I'm just using Microsoft Game Bar to capture this, so it's going to look awful, but it should get the point across. This is 3:1 test.braw, and you can see compression ratio 3:1. Codec bitrate that's about 100 megabytes per second, I guess, is what they're trying to get across there. But remember that beginning number, 812. And then I change this over to 5.1, and you can see compression ratio 5:1, codec bitrate 488. So it's a little more than a half, which is what it should be, right? That's the right ratio here, but I don't think that's the actual bitrate of this file. It literally can't be. That's got to be like the hard-coded value of what the codec bitrate for this codec should be, right? Or at least with the 3:1. Because like I said, we came out with the same file size. And look, FPS 24, 3840 by 2160. Everything's the same except the compression ratio and the apparent codec bitrate. But again, the actual bitrate isn't that. So I think it's lying. Well, not lying, but I think what's happening is it's writing to the metadata of the file, but it's actually recording in 5:1 compression ratio. Is that a firmware bug? I really don't know. I'm very confused. Well, that'll be a mystery for another day. For now, let's get back to the rest of the video. With flash storage, you can get very high speeds briefly off of even fairly low quality, low chip count drives like this one. The thing is, as they get hotter, they have thermal throttling in their controller, because basically what this is composed of is one or more flash chips, which actually provides the storage, as well as a flash controller that basically interfaces between, in this case, the USB and the flash chip itself, or flash chips. And so that controller and or the flash chips can get very hot, particularly the flash chips when writing, which is obviously what we're going to be doing with any high bitrate camera recording in RAW or high quality codec. And so as those flash chips heat up, if they're just allowed to heat up and heat up and heat up without any good heat sinking, like if this was, somehow covered especially, they would get so hot, they would burn themselves out, and they would basically. I can't phrase it like that on YouTube. YouTube's algorithm is going to think I'm talking about a person. Anyway, the flash chips will cease to function if they overheat too much. So there's going to be some kind of thermal monitoring integral into the controller, which is going to be monitoring the flash chip temperature as well as the controller temperature. If either one gets too hot, rather than shutting down and becoming useless, it will instead throttle its write speed and or read speed. So don't be fooled just because you're able to, for example, record to a drive like this for 2 minutes, as we've done so far, that it will do 3 minutes or 5 minutes or longer than that. And don't think that it'll do that in every environment. So, for example, the ambient temperature down here is probably about 25 degrees Celsius. If I was using this outdoors in Nevada in the middle of summer, and it was an ambient temperature of 40 degrees Celsius, and especially if we're in the hot sun baking down this thing, even if it worked right now, it might not work in that environment. So always test your media in the environment you're going to be using it in, unless it's some kind of high-end branded media that's usually extraordinarily expensive, but that's usually because it's been tested, not necessarily the exact unit you're getting, but I mean, it's been tested in all sorts of environments and conditions, and it's capable of high data rates for a sustained period of time. Whereas this flash drive is really just meant to store your personal documents, personal video files. Like, it's meant for just an average end user, not someone who's necessarily going to stream high bit rates to it for a long period of time. So I just want to include that caveat. Like, just because I can record to this for almost 4 minutes so far, and it's not getting that warm, it's getting a little hotter than it was actually. So it may start slowing down, but just because it can do this in this environment doesn't mean it will do this if I take it out of this environment. So even though I'm generally not a fan, like, I prefer Blackmagic's approach to let you use in their hyperdecks, for example, just regular consumer SSDs and or SD cards, and or in their cameras CF cards or CFast cards. I do appreciate the need for this kind of media. All right, so we got about 5 minutes out of it. It's not getting terribly hot, and you can see this is a 512 gig drive. We didn't record too much to it yet. It says we have an hour and 20 minutes approximately remaining. I'm actually just curious. The camera's getting real hot as before. And at the lowest raw bit rate, it will do 5 hours and 17 minutes on this mostly empty 512 gig flash drive. Suffice to say, we got some test footage on this drive, and let's plug it into that computer and just see what we got. Okay, and it popped up right away. And so you can see we got the Blackmagic raw files. This 16 gig file is going to be that nearly 5 minutes of 3:1 compression ratio. Ooh, why is that playback? That's probably, it's maxing out the disk on this system, and that's because this USB hub may only be connected to a USB 2.0 interface on that. If that drive is capable of writing at the speeds necessary for that codec, I'm sure it's capable of reading at those speeds. You can see we're getting 40 megabytes per second transfer. That's probably down to this USB interface. And this local disk will definitely be fast enough. Okay, so while that's copying, I plugged the camera back into the Ethernet port, and you can see it's showing an Ethernet connection right now. So it is connected to this computer via Ethernet, which is cool. This is one thing that could get you. If you're trying to administrate this over Ethernet, you have to connect it via USB first and change this allow utility administration to via USB and Ethernet, which is actually good, because if you did plug this into some kind of public network, someone in theory could otherwise mess with your settings, because there's no password control here, or no password protection. So let me plug it in to the computer again. And I realized what I didn't do before. I tried to set the camera name, but I didn't hit the set button next to it, which, it's kind of weird. That's okay, because none of these other boxes have set buttons next to them individually. But hey, so for my purposes, it's on my internal network at home. I'm fine with it going via USB and Ethernet. If I save that, and now I unplug it from the computer, it says it's not found, we will plug the Ethernet adapter back into it and connect that again to the network. And hopefully it should detect it. Yep, there it goes. So now it's picking it up over the network. You can see it has because it has this network icon here rather than the USB icon. And now we should be able to change the settings. Yep, because I changed the allow utility administration, which you can't disable via Ethernet, even though you can change all the other settings, which is kind of weird. But anyway, let's change that to cam 7, because that's ultimately the position this is going to take on my switcher. I'll update the domain URL as well. Ew. Okay, well that's fine for now. That could be relevant for you, so watch out for that. And let's take a look at the Web Media Manager and also file sharing. Oh, the problem is I will need a USB adapter. Can you connect a USB-C hub to this? That's actually an interesting question. And the camera just rebooted itself, by the way. I just heard the iris change, and there it goes. Now it came back. Now it's called Cam 7. So I guess it has to reboot when you change the camera name. Those files are still copying. So I just happened to very recently order a couple of these Oracle USB 3.2 10 gig USB hubs because I didn't have any USB hubs with C ports, either on the uplink or downlink. So the question I want to solve here is, if we disconnect the USB-C Ethernet interface, plug that into the hub, and this is a powered hub. It did come with a power supply and a DC barrel jack right there. I don't think it would require external power for this because we're not running any power-hungry devices, but let's connect this USB-C cable from the camera to the hub, and then see, do we even have a link light? We do. We have a link light. So the hub is getting power from the camera, and at least that USB-C port is working. So now I want to see if I can attach the USB-C stick. And the file actually just finished copying. All right, so I pulled the USB-C stick we're using before out of there, and let me get a split screen going. So I'm going to plug this in. What we should see is on the right, where you see it says no drive. If this works, it should say transcend. Yeah, or tran end, or tra end actually. The question is now, I got to change sides here. We need this side of it because then you'll be able to see the menu. Just sort of a bandwidth check. Put this back to the highest quality constant bitrate codec. The constant quality codecs below that are obviously constant quality and variable bitrate. But for this purpose, we want a steady bitrate. And let's look at this. I'm going to hit the record button. Yeah, and it's recording to the media while also having network access. So let me stop recording for a second. So we do have the media hooked up, and it does still have Ethernet access. So yeah, you can just use a USB-C hub to attach multiple devices to the camera, which is awesome. And so I'm pretty sure this USB Ethernet adapter, like I said, just supplies power. I'm sure you can get one of these with a USB-C hub in it that will allow you to have data on the USB-C port, Ethernet on the other, and it would be really convenient and small to attach to the camera when you're rigging it up. So you don't need a large USB-C hub like this. This is just the only one I have handy. Actually, it's the only one I have, period. And so now we should be able to get to the Web Media Manager, although this won't be in DNS. Oh, it did work. Cool. Yeah, and there we can see USB transcend, and there we go. We got our raw files, and we can download them or delete them. And this is one I just recorded. Let's try deleting that because I don't really need it for anything. Actually, I copied all these files off, so I don't need any of them. But yeah, and we could even upload a file to the camera. Don't know why we'd want to do that necessarily, but we could. And we could create a folder. Yay. Yep, it did it. So that's cool. What is perhaps cooler is that it has SMB access. And I think we can just hit Windows key R to go to run and paste that in there. Oh no, it wants an app. That's ridiculous. Okay. But it should be cam7.local. So if we just go to Explorer and we just go // cam7.local. In the meantime, let's try FTP. Okay. Again, I don't know. Oh, okay, yeah. No username, no password. Directory is USB at the top level. Yeah, and there we could see the directory Yay that I created earlier, as well as our raw files. What if I hit show in File Explorer? Is that going to... Oh, maybe it didn't require the cam7.local. And also the share name is transcend. Ah, my bad. I see. So if we just do cam7, yeah. So just for the record, you do not need the .local. Great. And there we go. I think this is the lowest bitrate one. Let's see if that'll play off the USB stick. Actually, this is over the network from the USB stick. But yeah, this is playing... Oh, actually, before the slowdown was because of the USB stick. Let's see. Can we play the highest bitrate one through the network? Yeah, that doesn't look like it's dropping frames. It's nice and shaky. So that's great, because then you can, without having to disconnect the flash media from the camera, if it's connected to a network, you can just go and preview these files on your laptop or whatever if you're out and about shooting. Because presumably you could also, well, no, because I don't think you could connect a USB-C Wi-Fi adapter to it, because there's no place to set Wi-Fi settings. It'd be kind of cool if you could. I mean, what you could definitely do, because this is an issue of Blackmagic, is you could use a Wi-Fi device in bridge mode or in repeater mode, which has an Ethernet port, and basically, to put it simply, would convert hardline Ethernet to Wi-Fi, and just basically bridge an Ethernet port to Wi-Fi. If you had that rigged up on the camera, you could definitely connect this to a Wi-Fi network that way. And of course, Wi-Fi is not ideal for reliability and consistency of speed, so you are better off, whenever possible, hooking this up to a hardline Ethernet connection. But anyway, that is pretty cool. I guess the only thing that remains is I'm going to have to go to post-production. And why is this so hot? This is hotter right now than it was when it was recording. This is very hot, even though it hasn't really been doing anything for the last few minutes, which is suspicious. It's suspicious in that it makes me think like the camera is writing to it. So yeah, what you're seeing right now is in post-production. Here it is graded. Obviously, it's not the most beautiful footage. It's not meant to be, but it does have some extreme highlights and some extreme shadows in it. And they'll give you an idea of the dynamic range of the camera, because despite those softboxes being, well, softboxes, there's still a lot of variation. I'm looking at them right now to the front of them. And that should give you a fair idea of the dynamic range of the camera, at least when pushed to the max. And when I say push to the max, I should clarify, I don't mean I was pushing the camera to the max as in max gain. I just mean maximum quality settings. This was actually set to 0 dB gain and stopped down a decent amount. And that's still what I was able to recover from the shadows. So those shadows shouldn't be indicative of this camera's low light performance in general. Again, that was about dynamic range, not low light performance. All right, I think that's good on this section. I'm going to cut for now, I guess. I was about to put this very, very long video to bed, and the last thing I wanted to show was a comparison between the camera you're looking through right now, which is a Blackmagic URSA Mini 4.6K G1. It's the Pro version. Their model names are a little wordy sometimes, or at least not easily distinguishable from similar models in their range. But that's besides the point. Well, actually, we'll get to that point in a second. But I wanted to compare this camera to the Micro Studio Camera just in this shot by setting up the Micro Studio Camera basically right in front of that camera. And so you can see the same field of view and see how those two stack up to each other, match up to each other, given that this is a fairly dynamic scene as far as lighting goes, because we have some really dark areas all the way in the back, and up front here, very bright. And in trying to do that comparison, I accidentally left the Micro Studio Camera on film dynamic range, whereas the URSA Mini you're looking through right now is set to video dynamic range, because mainly I didn't want to have to grade this footage in post, because for this kind of video, I'm not really going for an extreme look of any sort. So just like a sort of basic Rec 709 video profile where everything's sort of true to life is what I'm after here. So with the Micro Studio Camera G2 going into the switcher, again, I forgot that it was in film mode. So I tweaked the color settings on the camera via the switcher, tried to get them to match, did the best I could with the vector scope and waveform monitor. Still, and just with my own eyes, it still looked awful. And then I switched it to video. It just didn't look right. It didn't get a good match. And in order to try to get as best a match as possible, I had to extensively tweak the Micro Studio Camera's color settings, contrast, saturation, all that stuff, using the ATEM switcher control software, which sends commands to the camera, and the camera is actually where the color is processed, not on the switcher. The switcher just sends commands to change that stuff. And still didn't look right. And it was a lot of faff to get it to that point. Like I had to, sit there tweaking a lot of settings. One of the key problems with, I call it a problem, but one thing I don't like about the Blackmagic ecosystem for live production is that it's great that you can change the colors via SDI commands from the switcher, from one console, from one computer, without having a bunch of extraneous hardware. Like back in the day, you'd have camera control units for each camera, which you would then use to adjust the color of each camera, and then it would go into the switcher. A lot more complicated. It's a lot easier having it all digital, having it all in one place, right? I mean, that's one of the major benefits here. One of the detriments is that because the color information or the color adjustment information or the color calibration is stored in the camera itself, when you shut off the camera, when you disconnect power from the camera, it just loses those settings. Like, I wish it didn't, but it does. If I'm wrong about that, and there's some way to get it to save those settings and reuse them on boot remotely without having to actually fiddle around with the camera itself because you'd want to do it from the switcher, please tell me, because I'll feel like an idiot, but at least I'll be able to use that information in the future. But I don't think you can. In fact, on the ATEM software control, there's a lot of stuff you can change, and some of it does get saved locally on the switcher. Like, for example, audio level settings. Anything that's controlled on the switcher, anything that's processed on the switcher, pretty much you can save in the switcher on its flash storage or whatever it uses to store that information. Anything you send to the cameras, any SDI commands you send to the cameras, don't get saved anywhere. And when you power cycle the cameras or your whole setup, you have to recalibrate, readjust all the cameras independently one by one. There might be a third-party solution or some other solution for that, but I wanted something more straightforward in the long run. And so the Micro Studio Camera G2, the URSA Mini, a few other Blackmagic cameras I actually have down here besides those, all support lookup tables, 3D LUTs. So if I could find a lookup table that would very nicely convert the film look to the look that I wanted, which again is just basic, real-to-life representation of contrast and color, then that would be great. And even if I had to maybe tweak or edit that somewhat myself, the good thing is on the Micro Studio Camera, you can have a lookup table, and every time the camera boots up, if it's set to use that lookup table before it shuts down, it'll use that lookup table when it starts up. And that's perfect. That's what I would want if I had a lookup table that gave the look I wanted, which is pretty much just a Rec 709, like a converting film to video, which it even comes with one of those built in. Great. Problem is, and this might be significant to a lot of you, it applies the lookup table, if you want it to the HDMI output. It applies it to the recording, again, at your option, but there is no option to apply it to the SDI out. The SDI out is just going to be either film, extended video, or video. And the video, and I put this in quotes because that's just what Blackmagic is calling them, because it kind of conforms to various specifications, but not really. Like it says, I think in the manual, that the video setting is pretty much Rec 709, but not really, which is not a big deal for me. I'm fine with that. But again, it just didn't give the look that I wanted. So I'd want to experiment with lookup tables, but I'm feeding these cameras to my switcher via SDI. The problem is this switcher that I'm using doesn't have HDMI inputs. Now you might be using one of the ATEM switchers that only has HDMI inputs or has a few of them, and then for you that might be fine to use HDMI cables. I already have SDI cables everywhere. The switcher uses SDI, and also I guess you can send commands to the camera over HDMI, but that's how I have it set up. And so let me just show you what I mean. Here we have the output from the Micro Studio Camera, and because I'll bring up the menu, you'll be able to see that I'm on the HDMI output right now. And in the menu is a lookup tables section, and these all come preloaded on the camera. And there you go. And you can import more of them, so that's great. I think you can import up to like 33 of them or something, but you can switch them out as you need. So that's fine. I have no problem with that. That's actually a great feature. And then if we go down to the monitor section, you can see display 3D lookup table, and now we have a much more video-like image. So again, that's with the lookup table applied, and that's without it applied on the film profile. And the more I navigate through them, I'm not super happy with how the menus are laid out, but because the dynamic range here is set to film. And just as a reminder, if we set that to video, that looks almost exactly like the lookup table that I was just applying. In fact, that might be what it's doing internally. But if that is, then I'm not completely happy with the way that lookup table renders. But for now, this will prove my point. And so then this is the SDI output. Now, it looks like the menu just disappeared, but if I switch cameras, that's the HDMI, that's the SDI feed. And now, if I go, I can still see the HDMI menu on my preview monitor. I'm going to change it back to video from film, and you can see on the SDI, now we have a video's looking image. But again, the same one that we just saw, it's not the one I'm happy with. So I'm going to switch back to HDMI, and again, now you can see these images are the same. But of course, if we're applying a lookup table, we want to apply that to the full dynamic range of the camera. So we want to be in film here, and then enable the lookup table. But now, if I go back to the SDI output of the camera, you can see we still just have that low contrast, high dynamic range look, which is what we should see right now. Well, I say should, but it would be more ideal if I could apply the lookup table to the SDI out, but you know what I mean. This is sort of the expected output right now. And just to make a good visual point of when I'm using a lookup table versus when I just have the dynamic range of the camera set to video mode, I'm going to also just show you how you import from lookup tables menu, import from Transcend. That's the USB stick I was using before. That's currently hooked up to the camera. And here I actually downloaded the buttery LUTs because I found that recommended for these cameras. Even though this is for the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K 6K Gen 5, it comes in two different models, that's why it says 4K, 6K. But supposedly those work with this sensor. I think it's the same or similar sensor. So let me import that lookup table and then select it. And so now that lookup table is a black and white lookup table. It should give a black and white result. Like I said, this way we know when we're looking at the results of the lookup table versus the actual camera's output. And so again, just to make the point, this is the SDI out. You can see it's still in color. So the lookup table is definitely not being applied. I just want to make that clear. It's not a bad black and white, actually. I do kind of like that. Not for these videos, I just mean in general. It's a nice looking result. So anyway, yeah, man, my table here is really quite a mess after playing around with all this stuff. But I said, fine, I want to use SDI. I want a lookup table applied from the camera. Of course, there are plenty of boxes you can put in line with an SDI signal and apply a LUT in the middle, or apply a LUT to the signal. And one of those devices is the SDI to HDMI mini converter from, of course, Blackmagic. And I happen to have this. This was already in my basement. I think I have another one somewhere. So I was like, well, let me just test it out. I have the equipment already. And you might say, well, no, wait, SDI to HDMI, we want the HDMI feed from the camera with the lookup table applied going to SDI. Well, here's the thing I didn't know until I started looking into this. Apparently, these mini converters will apply the lookup table not just to the HDMI output, but also to the SDI loop output. And so you could use this as a LUT box, and so you can ignore the HDMI completely and just loop the SDI through it and have a lookup table applied to that signal. And you can, then you can also use the HDMI output for monitoring or troubleshooting or whatever. Seems like a good idea. Well, turns out, this is what I meant earlier about Blackmagic Design's naming conventions for hardware. This is the Blackmagic Design Mini Converter SDI to HDMI 4K, which is Ultra HD 6G SDI. And according to the manual that came with the software I used to just update this converter yesterday, this should be capable of applying a lookup table, only it's not. You see, there's also a newer version of this. This is a bit old. There's a newer version called the Blackmagic Design Mini Converter SDI to HDMI 6G. It looks exactly the same as this, except instead of 4K right there, it says 6G. And the reason that's confusing is because this thing in my hand is a 6G device. So it's my own fault for like not noticing that minor difference in the model name, but it's also one I glossed over because I know the 6G SDI signal is, for all intents and purposes, capable of 4K video or Ultra HD video, and this said 6G on it, so I didn't really notice that discrepancy. So kind of annoying. Apparently this older version cannot have a lookup table. Being kind of annoyed by that, I just went to B&H and bought one of these. Well, actually I bought two of them. SDI to HDMI 12G. This is a brand new version, and apparently you can apply a lookup table to the SDI loop. So let's try that, because some of you might be in the same flummoxed situation where you really want SDI output from this camera with a lookup table applied, and you can't get that. And I don't think a proper unboxing here is really necessary. I mean, we got a power supply, and if it would come out, we got the device itself, which now this is a micro converter, so it's about that much smaller than the mini converter, about the same thickness though. Yeah. And this is, I presume, just a USB-C power supply, USB-C connection, and it outputs, it's in Chinese. Oh, it's on the side. Yeah. 5 volts, 2 amps. You'll have to trust me on that. Which is actually good, because then you could use this with a USB type A to C cable, because a lot of USB type A power supplies can also output 5 volts at 2 amps. Well, pretty much all of them can output 5 volts. It's the 2 amps that's sometimes the question. And so you can see one side HDMI out, SDI in, SDI loop out. And the mini converter, this is an older version, but I think the newer version has all the same inputs and outputs. This has an alternate SDI in, which if the main SDI in signal goes dead, it'll take the signal from the alternate in, which is good just for redundancy. Although this box seems like a single point of failure more so than probably whatever signal you're pumping into it, but whatever. And this also has analog audio, or AES EBU audio, off of this jack. They're both 1/4 inch phone jacks, TRS. Actually, it's probably just TS. It's probably not stereo. I don't know. Maybe the AES EBU. Well, whatever. It doesn't matter. You can look up the specs for it if you're interested. But the point is, more inputs and outputs than the microconverter. But the microconverter, I think, is going to be good because I can mount it up near the camera in the gantry. And also, I love that this has USB power, and presumably that same USB port, because there's no other USB port, is used for firmware updates and configurations like applying lookup tables, whereas with this older version, it has a mini USB connector and a barrel jack for a 12-volt power supply. So 2 separate things. So the cool thing about this is that I can use 2 of these with a USB powered hub, because this will take external power that'll deliver enough power to run 2 of these, and then I can also have them constantly connected to my computer via USB to this hub. This way I can change lookup tables on the fly without having to rewire anything. So I think that's a cool use case for these with the USB hub, and it might be for you in your situation too. Alright, enough waffling. I have this cable here hooked up to my computer that I'll show you in a second, and all I'm going to do is plug this into here. This won't supply enough power to actually run the device, but I'm hoping at least supplies enough power to wake up its controller chip or whatever it has in here, so I can check to make sure the firmware is up to date and load a lookup table on it for now, before I wire it up the way I'll ultimately have it. I already have the converter set up software loaded here. All I'm going to do is plug that converter into the USB, and we'll see what happens. There it goes. Okay, it took a second, but I forgot, this actually is a powered USB hub that I have it connected to right now. It's just a USB type A hub. And then if we go, if it needed a firmware update, it presumably would have done one already automatically. And here you can see some of the settings that might be appropriate for you, but what really I'm after is just the capability for lookup tables. We're going to import one. And like I said, I'm going to use these buttery LUTs just for testing, and I'm going to, because we currently have the black and white applied right now on the camera for the HDMI output, I'm going to apply crunchy gold, because that'll be, I think, really obvious that the lookup table is being applied. Like, we want to know for sure that it's actually getting processed through a lookup table. So Let's pick one with maybe a little more of an extreme look. So by default, it would just apply lookup table to the HDMI output, but here we can apply it to the loop output. So we can do this purely via SDI. Save that, and presumably that should be working right now. And just to be clear what I got going on here, for just my own testing purposes, I had this Blackmagic Video Assist hooked up to the camera. So the camera's feeding to the Video Assist right now, and the Video Assist is feeding back to the switcher. So it's basically looping through the Video Assist right now, rather than doing that. Oh my god, that's the tightest BNC connector in the world. Okay. I'm going to connect this to the SDI loop out, and the output from the camera to the SDI in, logically enough. Now let's see what we have on our SDI output from the camera. That definitely does not look like the film look from before. That red does look kind of goldish. You know, just to hammer the point home, I'm going to just change it to the black and white lookup table also to just show you how easy it is to change lookup tables. If this box was permanently connected via USB to a computer that I had handy, I could just easily change lookup tables like that on the fly. And now we're back at the SDI output from the camera, and you can see it is black and white, so the lookup table is getting applied. And again, just to make a distinction, I just switched back to the HDMI. Let's change the lookup table in the camera on its HDMI back to just standard video. See, I just don't like that image. It's like just a little too something. Too yellow, I don't know. So again, now HDMI just has the video lookup table applied, and SDI has black and white. Cool. So this little box is doing exactly what we want it to do. And then just for funsies, I got the split screen going on the switcher. I like a slightly more contrasty image, so let's try the Gen 5 Natural Rec 709 V1. +1 contrast. And you can see it changes right away. And maybe just close up that iris a little bit. Anyway, the point is now I can very easily, from the comfort of this computer, even if the camera is somewhere else, play around with this and just see which one of these suits me best. So let's see if this one should be lower contrast because it doesn't have that +1 bump to contrast. And yeah, it doesn't look bad. I find the surface of the table just really suited to setting up exposure and contrast and making sure the color is accurate. So here is the camera you're looking through right now is the Blackmagic Micro Studio Camera G1. And the table in this image, the color right here, looks very similar on my relatively calibrated monitor as it does to my eye, as does my skin tone. So the G1 cameras I really like for natural, true-to-life color reproduction. Like everything, even these wires here, that's all pretty accurate. The orange here, it's all very true to life. Whereas if we go to the other G2 camera that's up there, you can see it's just not quite. Actually, I just want to double check that this camera overhead here is, I'm sorry it's out of focus. I'm not going to bother changing that. Yeah, okay. It is set to dynamic range video. And right now, the G1 camera, there is no modification for color, contrast, anything. All I did was set the exposure using the iris with the gain at +6. Did not change anything as far as the camera's color profile goes. The G2 camera, this is with its video output. And again, I said it before, this is after I've used the camera for a few days. I do think this camera has a much better dynamic range, which it well should. And the image generally just looks a bit nicer. You could see what I mean. Like, this looks more like a video camera. This looks more like a cinema camera's output. But it's not really true to life. Like, this color, this table right now looks too yellow. It should look a little more orange. Whatever. Anyway, you can see the difference with your own eyes. But you have to trust me that to my eyes sitting here, looking at this scene directly with my eyeballs, this camera looks much more true to life than this camera. but this camera has a lot more latitude for adjustment and for exposure than this camera. So this is the better camera. Like I said, all I'm going to do is find a lookup table that gives me a true to life look with a color reproduction that I'm happy with, and then it's perfect. That's the idea. All right, so this is the URSA Mini 4K G1, 4K Pro G1. And this is the SDI output from the Micro Studio Camera G2. Obviously, it doesn't look good without any processing in film mode, which is to be expected. This is exactly what it should look like. I'm not complaining about this. This is just the baseline for the lookup table to be applied to. So let me just wire up the Magic Box. And here's what it looks like with the lookup table applied that we had set up on that box. The lookup table saved on that box. I unplugged it, put in a USB extension cable, ran it over there next to the camera, and it started back up with the same lookup table we left off on. So that's great. And the only thing I think I might do is boost the contrast a little bit, because I do boost the contrast on the URSA Mini 55%, and the saturation, I don't know that we need this. I give the URSA Mini a little saturation boost also, but I don't think we need as much here. And so now let's see, sorry to be facing away from you, but that's where the switcher control is. So URSA Mini, Blackmagic Micro Studio Camera. Yeah, pushing the contrast ain't gonna help me. I could just leave the contrast at 50%, which is basically neutral, and then we could see maybe it will look better with the +1 contrast. Actually, let's try the +2 contrast. It doesn't look bad actually, but URSA Mini Micro Studio Camera, I mean, yeah, it's not a perfect match by any means, but it's definitely closer. And wider field of view on the Micro Studio Camera. It's A little bit closer, B has a different size sensor, C it's a micro four thirds lens, whereas the URSA Mini is a Canon EF lens. So yeah, we got different stuff going on here. That's why it frames a bit differently. But the idea is really just to look at the color and contrast and stuff like that, not so much the composition. Yeah, Blackmagic Micro Studio Camera. This is what it looks like with a reasonable quality LUT applied. We can see the dark stuff all the way in the back. We can see the lighter stuff up front. And yeah, I mean, obviously in different environments, it'll look different. And maybe one day I'll take it around town and actually get it in a lot of different environments. But for now, this is the environment I need it for, and this is good enough. I will look for a better LUT to better, I don't know, match the natural look of what we have down here. But yeah, if you watched this far, thank you. I know it's been a long one, kind of rambly in parts. That's why this chapter is, so you can skip through it, hopefully. But if you had some questions that maybe weren't answered by Blackmagic Design's manuals or marketing materials, and you want to see the camera in action, I hope this helped you. It certainly helped me, because I got all this banged out for myself and figured all this out over the course of this video. And, well, that's... Am I just implying that the video was made for me? That doesn't make sense. Because why... No. People got use out of the video. Right? I think. Well, shit. Anyway, that was the video. Goodbye. Oh, like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. Oh, I was looking at the wrong camera. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. Do whatever you want to do. I don't care. Bye. Oh, I just noticed that. Side note, I gotta double check this. Yeah. Oh, that's cool. I need a camera pointed at that camera to show you. Okay, we're now looking at this camera that's shooting me right now, which is the Blackmagic Micro Studio Camera. And you'll notice it has a green tally light right now. And that's because it's not on air, but it's on the preview monitor. If I change the preview monitor to a different camera, the tally light turns white. If I change it back to that camera, it turns green. And then if I bring that camera live by just doing a cheeky little wipe, it turns red. So program, preview, nothing. That's cool. I like that little extra touch of adding the green. Just noticed that, sorry. With the old Micro Studio cameras, they had white or red. There was no green to indicate preview. Same with the full-size studio cameras. This one you can see has no tally light. If we wipe to that one, you can see the tally light turns red when it's on program. Yeehaw. And then off when it's got nothing going on. So that just has a red tally light. So I like that red, green, white tally light thing. Red, green, white tally light. I think that's the last thing I'm going to show you about the camera, because it's the last thing I found out about the camera. Go figure. Anyway, to all, a good night. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. Yeah. There's really no point to having two cameras there. Well, actually, I did have a second camera right here. I use it for close-ups from the front. But anyway, that's besides the point. Bye.